The medical station floated in the darkness of space like a giant wheel spinning slowly around the blue planet below. Inside the station, nurses and doctors moved through white corridors taking care of sick people and wounded soldiers. Katie Morrison walked quickly through the emergency ward, carrying medical supplies in her arms. She was 26 years old with long auburn hair tied back in a neat ponytail. Her uniform showed the silver bars of a lieutenant in the Terran Medical Corps. She had been working on this station for 2 years now, and she loved her job even though it was hard sometimes. The year was 2247 and humans had spread across many star systems, building homes on distant planets. This medical station called Meridian orbited a colony world named New Colorado. Katie worked here treating colonists who got sick and soldiers who got hurt, fighting the alien enemy called the Draviks. The Draviks were hostile creatures from another part of the galaxy who wanted to take human territory. There had been fighting for 3 years now, and Katie saw many wounded Marines come through her ward. Katie was married to a Marine general named Patrick Morrison. He was 42 years old and commanded a huge fleet of warships far away from the station. Patrick was famous in the military as a great leader and fierce warrior. People called him the Iron Wolf because he protected his soldiers like a wolf protects his pack. Katie missed him terribly because he was always away fighting battles, but she understood that his duty was important. They talked whenever they could through video calls across space. The station was run by a man named Dr. Vincent Harlow. He was 55 years old and cared more about money and power than helping people. Harlow wore expensive clothes and walked around like he owned everything. He was the chief executive officer, which meant he made all the important decisions. Most of the medical staff did not like him because he was mean and greedy. He especially did not like military people, and he made their lives difficult whenever he could. On this particular day, Katie was working her regular shift when alarms started blaring throughout the emergency ward. A transport ship had just arrived carrying wounded Marines from a battle. Katie ran to the receiving bay where medical teams were already gathering. The doors opened and stretchers came rushing in. Young men and women in Marine uniforms lay bleeding and broken on the beds. Katie quickly assessed each patient, deciding who needed help first. One Marine caught her attention immediately. He was a young corporal named Jake Bennett, and he was dying. His chest had been torn open by alien weapons and blood was everywhere. Katie checked his vital signs and knew he had minutes to live if she did not act fast. She called for a surgical team and started preparing to move him into an operating room. Just then, Dr. Harlow appeared in the receiving bay. He looked at the wounded Marines with disgust and turned to Katie. He told her that the main surgical room was reserved for an important civilian patient. A colonial governor was scheduled for a routine procedure, and Harlow said that appointment could not be delayed. Katie looked at him in disbelief. The governor's surgery was not urgent, but this Marine would die without immediate help. Katie made a decision right there. She told Dr. Harlow that she was moving the Marine into surgery immediately, because medical ethics required treating the most critical patients first. Harlow's face turned red with anger. He stepped closer to Katie and told her in a cold voice that she was disobeying a direct order. Katie did not back down. She looked him in the eye and said that saving lives was more important than political appointments. Then she ordered her team to take Jake Bennett into the surgical room. For the next 3 hours, Katie and her team worked frantically to save the young Marine's life. They repaired damaged organs and sealed torn blood vessels. It was difficult surgery, but Katie was skilled and determined. Finally, Jake's vital signs stabilized and he was moved to recovery. Katie was exhausted but relieved. She had saved his life. The colonial governor's routine procedure had been delayed by 2 hours, but the man was fine and his surgery went smoothly. Afterward, Katie thought the matter was settled until the next morning when she received a message ordering her to report to Dr. Harlow's office immediately. She walked through the station feeling nervous but also proud of what she had done. When she entered the office, Harlow was sitting behind his desk with a cold smile on his face. He did not invite her to sit down. Instead, he stood up and told her to follow him. Harlow led Katie out of his office and into the main medical bay where dozens of staff members and patients were present. Katie felt confused about why they were going there. Then Harlow stopped in the center of the room and turned to face her. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. He began shouting at Katie, calling her incompetent and insubordinate. He said she had embarrassed him in front of the colonial governor. He accused her of putting her own judgment above proper authority. Katie tried to explain that she was following medical protocols, but Harlow would not listen. Other staff members watched in shock as their boss continued his tirade. Then Harlow said something that made everyone freeze. He announced that Katie would face public discipline for her disobedience. He claimed there was an old regulation from the early colony days that allowed him to punish any staff member who defied orders. 2 security officers appeared and grabbed Katie's arms. She struggled, but they held her tight. Dr. Harlow pulled out a pair of medical clippers from his coat. Katie's eyes widened as she realized what he was going to do. Harlow stepped forward with that cruel smile still on his face. He turned on the clippers and they buzzed loudly in the quiet room. Katie stood as straight as she could, even though her heart was pounding. She would not give this man the satisfaction of seeing her beg. The security officers forced her to bend her head down. Harlow grabbed her ponytail and began cutting. The clippers moved across her scalp, shaving away her beautiful auburn hair. Long strands fell to the floor around her feet. Tears rolled down Katie's cheeks, but she did not make a sound. She bit her lip and stared at the floor as her humiliation continued. When Harlow finished, Katie's head was completely bald. The medical staff and patients watched in horror. Some people looked away, unable to bear seeing this cruelty. Harlow then ripped the rank insignia from Katie's uniform. He announced loudly that she was suspended from duty pending termination. He told her to get out of his sight. The security officers released her arms and Katie walked away with as much dignity as she could manage. Her head was bare, and her career seemed destroyed, but she held her head high. Katie walked through the empty corridors toward her quarters with her head down. People stared at her as she passed, but she did not look at them. Her bald head felt cold under the station's air conditioning, and her scalp tingled where the clippers had scraped her skin. When she finally reached her small room, she locked the door behind her and sat on her bed. Only then did she allow herself to cry freely. The tears came hard and fast as the full weight of what had happened crashed down on her. She had been humiliated in front of everyone she worked with, and her career was probably over. Within hours, the footage of Katie's punishment began spreading through the station's computer network. Someone had recorded the whole thing on their personal device, and now everyone could see what Dr. Harlow had done. Medical staff members passed the video to each other in disbelief. Several people who witnessed the event felt sick about not stepping in to help Katie, but they had been too afraid of Harlow's power. The video showed everything clearly, including Harlow's cruel expression and Katie's silent dignity as her hair fell away. The video did not stay contained on the station for long. Some staff members sent it through military communication channels to friends serving on warships. From there, it spread like fire through the fleet. Marines and naval officers watched the footage with growing anger. They saw one of their own being degraded and abused by a civilian administrator. The Marine who Katie had saved, Corporal Jake Bennett, watched the video from his hospital bed and felt rage building inside him. He tried to get up to confront Harlow, but medical staff held him down. His injuries were still too severe for him to move around. Other Marines on the station were equally furious. They gathered in small groups discussing what had happened. Some wanted to march to Harlow's office and teach him a lesson about respect. Their sergeants had to calm them down and remind them that violence would only make things worse. The tension between military personnel and civilian staff grew thick and dangerous. Security officers noticed the angry looks from Marines and began to worry about keeping order on the station. Katie spent most of that first day alone in her quarters. She found a scarf in her closet and wrapped it around her head to cover her baldness. Several friends from the medical staff came to visit her, bringing food and words of support. They told her that everyone knew Harlow was wrong and that she had done the right thing. Katie appreciated their kindness, but she felt numb inside. She kept thinking about her husband Patrick far away commanding his fleet. She did not want to bother him with her problems when he had a war to fight, but she desperately needed to hear his voice. That evening, Katie made a decision. She would call Patrick, even though quantum communication across star systems was expensive and usually reserved for emergencies. She sat down at her small desk and activated the communication terminal. The machine hummed as it established a connection through quantum entanglement. It took several minutes, but finally Patrick's holographic image appeared floating above her desk. He was in his office aboard his flagship wearing his uniform. When he saw Katie, his face immediately broke into a warm smile, but then the smile faded as he looked closer at her. Patrick asked Katie what was wrong. He could see the scarf wrapped around her head and the redness around her eyes from crying. Katie tried to smile and tell him everything was fine, but her voice cracked. Patrick leaned forward in his hologram, looking concerned. He spoke gently and asked her to please tell him what happened. Katie hesitated because she did not want to distract him from his important mission, but Patrick insisted. He told her that nothing was more important than her well-being, so Katie told him everything. She explained about saving Jake Bennett's life and defying Harlow's orders. She described the public humiliation and showed him her shaved head by removing the scarf. Patrick's expression changed as she talked. His jaw became tight and his eyes grew cold like steel. Katie had seen that look before when he was planning military operations. It scared her a little because she knew what it meant. Patrick was furious, but he was controlling his anger with iron discipline. When Katie finished talking, there was silence for a moment. Then Patrick told her in a calm voice that she had done the right thing and he was proud of her. He said that Harlow had no right to treat her that way and there would be consequences. Katie quickly told Patrick not to do anything rash. She said she would handle the situation through proper legal channels and file complaints with the medical corps. Patrick nodded slowly, but Katie could see the fire burning behind his eyes. He told her he loved her and promised that everything would be all right. They talked for a few more minutes about other things, trying to keep the conversation normal. Then the call ended and Patrick's hologram faded away. What Katie did not know was that Patrick had already seen the video before her call. His Chief of Staff, Commander Lisa Chen, had brought it to his attention an hour earlier. Patrick had been sitting in his command center watching the footage over and over. Each time he watched it, his anger grew colder and more focused. His senior officers noticed the change in him and became nervous. They knew their general well enough to recognize when he was planning something big. After the call with Katie ended, Patrick sat in silence for a full minute. His officers waited quietly, knowing better than to interrupt him when he was thinking. Finally, Patrick turned to Commander Chen and began giving orders in that same calm, controlled voice. He told her to initiate an immediate tactical withdrawal from their current engagement with the Dravik's fleet. He would delegate command of ongoing operations to Admiral Richard Cole, who was his second in command. Patrick then said he needed his personal corvette prepared for departure, and he wanted 20 Marines from his personal guard ready to leave within 2 hours. Commander Chen did not question the orders even though she was surprised. She knew that look in the general's eyes. She simply nodded and began making the necessary arrangements. Within minutes, the massive fleet began repositioning itself as Patrick's flagship withdrew from the battle zone. Other ship captains wondered what was happening, but they trusted their commander. They knew he must have good reasons for his actions. Patrick went to his quarters and packed a small bag. He changed from his combat uniform into his formal dress uniform with all his medals and ribbons. He looked at himself in the mirror and thought about his wife sitting alone on that station with her head shaved and her dignity stripped away. The man responsible would learn a hard lesson about what happened when you hurt someone under the protection of the Terran Marines. Patrick picked up his bag and headed to the docking bay where his corvette was waiting. The Valkyrie's Fury was a fast, sleek warship built for speed. It would get him to New Colorado much faster than any regular transport. Patrick boarded the ship and took his seat in the command chair. Commander Chen and the 20 Marines were already aboard. Patrick gave the order to launch, and the corvette shot away from the fleet like an arrow flying toward its target. Dr. Harlow walked through the medical station feeling very pleased with himself. He believed he had won the confrontation with Katie and taught everyone a valuable lesson about authority. Nobody would dare question his decisions now after seeing what happened to the nurse who defied him. Harlow spent the next day conducting station business as usual. He met with department heads and reviewed financial reports. His assistant brought him expensive coffee imported from Earth, and he sipped it while looking out his office window at the stars. When staff members submitted formal complaints about his treatment of Katie, he simply filed them away in his computer. He sent back messages saying their concerns were noted, but that he stood by his actions. Some brave souls tried to argue that his behavior was cruel and possibly illegal, but Harlow dismissed their objections. He had friends in powerful positions within the Colonial Medical Consortium. These friends would protect him from any serious consequences. Harlow was confident that his political connections made him untouchable. 2 days after the incident, Harlow called a mandatory meeting for all station personnel. Everyone was required to attend except those on critical duty. The meeting was held in the main conference hall, which was a large room with rows of seats facing a stage. Staff members filed in looking nervous and uncomfortable. They took their seats and waited quietly. Harlow walked onto the stage wearing an expensive suit. He stood at the podium and began his speech. Harlow talked about the importance of following orders and respecting authority. He said that civilian leadership always took precedence over military personnel in facilities like this medical station. He made it clear that anyone who questioned his decisions would face consequences similar to what Katie had experienced. His tone was threatening even though his words were carefully chosen. Everyone in the room understood the message. Cross Dr. Harlow and you would be punished. Several people in the audience were secretly recording the speech on their devices. The footage quickly spread through both civilian and military communication networks. People who watched it were shocked by Harlow's arrogance and his thinly veiled threats. The video added fuel to the growing anger that many felt about how Katie had been treated. Military personnel throughout the sector began calling for action against Harlow, but official channels moved slowly. Katie remained in her quarters during this time. She refused to leave the station even though she had been suspended. This was her home and she would not be driven away. Friends continued visiting her, bringing food and news. Corporal Jake Bennett, the Marine she had saved, was recovering well from his injuries. When he was strong enough to walk, he found a way to slip past security and came to Katie's quarters. He knocked on her door, and when Katie opened it, she saw the young Marine standing there looking emotional. Jake thanked Katie for saving his life. He told her that every Marine on the station would follow her orders without question because she had proven she cared more about their lives than about politics or career advancement. Katie was touched by his words. She invited him in, and they talked for a while about the situation. Jake wanted to do something to help her, but Katie insisted he should focus on recovering from his wounds. She promised him she would fight this through proper legal channels. After Jake left, Katie sat down at her desk and began working. She started documenting everything that had happened in precise detail. She reviewed her service record, which showed years of excellent performance. She collected written statements from witnesses who had seen the public humiliation. She researched the regulation that Harlow had cited as justification for his actions. What she discovered made her heart beat faster with hope. The colonial regulation he had used was actually repealed 8 years ago. It was no longer valid law. Either Harlow did not know this or he had deliberately ignored the truth. Either way, his legal justification was completely false. Katie prepared a detailed report of her findings. She planned to file formal charges through the Terran Medical Corps legal office. She would accuse Harlow of assault, abuse of authority, and using invalid regulations to justify illegal punishment. Katie worked late into the night organizing her evidence and writing her statement. She was determined to fight back properly without resorting to violence or breaking rules herself. While Katie worked on her case, something was happening far away in space. The Valkyrie's Fury was racing toward the new Colorado system at maximum speed. The Corvette's engines burned hot, pushing the ship faster than was normally safe. Patrick sat in the command chair reviewing information on his tablet. He was reading about Dr. Harlow's background and the legal frameworks governing medical stations. Commander Chen sat nearby coordinating with the crew. The 20 Marines in the cargo bay checked their equipment and waited quietly. The journey normally took 5 days, but Patrick's Corvette would arrive in 36 hours. The ship dropped out of quantum slip space at the edge of the new Colorado system right on schedule. Immediately, the station's traffic control detected the incoming vessel. They scanned the ship's identification codes and saw that it was a military corvette. When they checked the passenger manifest, their eyes went wide. General Patrick Morrison himself was aboard and requesting priority docking clearance. The traffic controller on duty did not know what to do. It was unusual for such a high-ranking officer to arrive without advance notice. The controller tried to delay the docking request by citing standard inspection protocols. Commander Chen, who was piloting the corvette, calmly overrode the objection. She invoked emergency military authority under wartime regulations. This gave General Morrison the right to dock at any facility housing military personnel without delay or inspection. The traffic controller panicked and immediately contacted the station administrator. A bureaucrat named Leonard Hughes received the message and felt his stomach drop. He knew about the incident with Katie Morrison, and now her husband was arriving unannounced. Hughes ran through the corridors to Dr. Harlow's office. He burst through the door without knocking. Harlow was sitting at his desk drinking whiskey and going over financial spreadsheets. He looked up, annoyed at the interruption. Hughes blurted out the news that General Morrison was inbound and would dock within minutes. For the first time since the incident, Harlow's confident expression faltered. He knew Patrick Morrison by reputation. The Iron Wolf was famous throughout the military as a brilliant tactician and fierce protector of his people. Harlow had assumed that the general was too far away and too busy fighting the war to get involved in this matter. Apparently, he had been wrong. Harlow quickly composed himself and straightened his tie. He told Hughes to calm down. After all, Harlow reasoned, he was the chief executive officer of this station and Morrison had no authority over civilian facilities. The general could not just march in here and make demands. Harlow decided he would stand his ground. He ordered Hughes to send security officers to meet the general's ship at the docking bay. They would inform Morrison that any meeting had to be scheduled through proper administrative channels. Hughes nodded nervously and left to carry out the orders. Harlow poured himself another glass of whiskey and drank it quickly. He tried to convince himself that everything would be fine, but a small voice in the back of his mind whispered that he might have made a terrible mistake. The docking bay of Meridian Station was crowded with people when the Valkyrie's Fury arrived. Word had spread throughout the station that General Morrison was coming, and everyone wanted to witness what would happen next. The corvette glided smoothly through the magnetic field and locked into place with a heavy clunk. The airlock began cycling and people held their breath waiting. Station security officers stood in formation near the door, looking uncomfortable in their gray uniforms. Behind them, nearly 50 Marines stationed on Meridian stood at perfect attention in their dress uniforms. The contrast between the two groups was obvious. The security officers looked like nervous clerks while the Marines looked like warriors ready for battle. The airlock door opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. General Patrick Morrison stepped through first. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing his dress uniform covered with medals and ribbons. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes held absolute authority. Behind him came 20 Marines in full combat armor, though their weapons remained holstered. Commander Lisa Chen walked at Patrick's right side carrying a data tablet. The group moved forward with military precision. Chief Security Officer Norman Blake stepped forward to meet them. He was a middle-aged man with thinning hair who looked very nervous. Blake cleared his throat and began reading from a prepared statement that Dr. Harlow had given him. He talked about proper protocols and the need to schedule appointments through administrative channels. He got about 3 sentences into his speech when Patrick raised one hand. The gesture was small but commanding. Blake immediately fell silent like someone had switched off his voice. Patrick spoke in a calm, measured tone that somehow carried across the entire docking bay without him needing to shout. He stated that he was here under the authority of the Terran Defense Forces to investigate a violation of military law. Specifically, he was investigating the unlawful abuse and humiliation of a commissioned officer. He informed Blake that he would be speaking with Dr. Harlow immediately, and that anyone who attempted to interfere would be charged with obstruction of a military investigation during wartime. The way Patrick said it made clear this was not a request or a suggestion. It was a statement of fact about what was going to happen. Blake looked at the 20 armored Marines standing behind Patrick. He looked at the 50 station Marines standing at attention with expressions of fierce approval on their faces. He looked back at Patrick's cold, steady gaze. Blake was actually sympathetic to Katie, and he had been disgusted by what Harlow did to her. He made a token effort to follow his orders by mentioning administrative procedures one more time. Then he stepped aside. He quietly told Patrick that Dr. Harlow was in his office on the administrative level. Patrick nodded his thanks and began walking forward. What happened next would become legendary in the annals of the Terran Defense Forces. Patrick Morrison walked through the station's corridors with his Marines flanking him in perfect formation. Word of his arrival spread faster than he could walk. Medical staff members appeared in doorways. Patients in wheelchairs moved into the halls to watch. Technicians and maintenance workers stopped their tasks. Civilians lined the corridors as the general passed. The silence was profound. Nobody spoke or made noise. They just watched. Every Marine that Patrick encountered immediately snapped to rigid attention and saluted with crisp precision. Patrick returned each salute without breaking his stride. His boots made steady rhythmic sounds on the metal floor. Medical staff who had supported Katie watched with barely hidden satisfaction. Those who had sided with Harlow suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere and disappeared. Someone in the station's communications center activated the internal monitoring system. Patrick's progress was broadcast on screens throughout the facility. People in break rooms and medical wards watched as the general made his way through the station like an unstoppable force. Katie saw the broadcast from her quarters. She had been working on her legal documentation when someone sent her a message telling her to turn on her screen. Now she watched her husband walking through the station with that expression of controlled intensity she knew so well. Her heart pounded in her chest. Part of her wanted to run to him and tell him to stop. She could handle this herself through proper channels, but another part of her felt a fierce pride and love for this man, who would cross 3-star systems to defend her honor. She knew nothing would stop him now. Patrick reached the administrative level and approached the ornate doors leading to Harlow's office. The nameplate on the wall read, Dr. Vincent Harlow, Chief Executive Officer, in gold letters that looked expensive. 2 security guards stood outside the doors. They saw Patrick and his 20 armored Marines approaching and looked at each other nervously. Commander Chen stepped forward and spoke politely but firmly. She told the guards they could either open the door or step aside while the Marines opened it for them. The guards considered their options. They looked at the armed Marines. They looked at each other again. Then they wisely chose to open the door themselves. Patrick walked into the office alone, leaving his Marines in the corridor. The office was ridiculously luxurious for a medical station. The walls were covered with expensive wood paneling. Artwork that probably cost more than a year's salary hung on the walls. A massive desk dominated the room. Behind the desk, a viewport showed the beautiful curve of New Colorado against the black of space. Dr. Harlow sat behind his desk trying to look confident, but the fear in his eyes was obvious. He stood up when Patrick entered. For a long moment, the 2 men simply stared at each other. Patrick closed the door behind him with a quiet click. That small sound seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Harlow's hands gripped the edge of his desk. Patrick stood perfectly still with his hands clasped behind his back. Neither man spoke. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Outside in the corridor, the Marines waited. Throughout the station, people watched screens showing the closed office door. Everyone wondered what was happening inside. Finally, Harlow broke the silence. He tried to take control of the situation by launching into a prepared speech. He talked about civilian jurisdiction and proper protocols. He claimed that Patrick's uninvited arrival was inappropriate. He insisted that whatever marital dispute Patrick might have was personal business and had no place in a professional facility. His voice grew stronger as he talked, feeding on his own words. He threatened to file complaints with the Colonial Administrative Council. He suggested that Patrick's career could suffer if he did not leave immediately. He went on for several minutes, building up momentum. Patrick let him talk. He stood there listening with that same neutral expression. When Harlow finally ran out of things to say and fell silent, Patrick waited a few more seconds. Then he spoke for the first time since entering the office. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it carried an edge like a blade that could cut through steel. He began by correcting Harlow's misconceptions. This was not a marital dispute, Patrick explained. This was a military investigation into the abuse of a commissioned officer of the Terran Defense Forces. Patrick continued speaking in that same quiet, dangerous voice. He explained that Lieutenant Katie Morrison was not just a nurse. She held commissioned rank in the Terran Medical Corps, which made her a military officer subject to military law. More importantly, it meant she was entitled to military protection. What Harlow had done to her violated at least 7 different articles of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Patrick listed them one by one with precise legal citations. Assault on an officer, conduct unbecoming, abuse of authority, unlawful punishment, failure to follow proper disciplinary procedures, creating a hostile work environment, and conspiracy to obstruct military medical operations. Harlow tried to interrupt, but Patrick kept talking. His voice never rose in volume, but somehow it filled the room. Patrick pulled up a holographic display from his wrist computer. The blue light projected into the air between them, showing legal documents and regulations. Patrick methodically went through the colonial regulation that Harlow had cited to justify his actions. Then Patrick showed that the regulation had been officially repealed 8 years ago. It was no longer valid law. Harlow's justification was completely false. This transformed his actions from questionable discipline into criminal assault. The color drained from Harlow's face as he realized the trap closing around him. He stammered that he thought the regulation was still valid. He claimed he had not known it was repealed. Patrick's eyes narrowed. He pulled up another display showing Katie's personnel file. Her service record clearly listed her rank and commission. Her identification photo showed her wearing lieutenant's bars. The video of her humiliation clearly showed those same rank insignia on her uniform before Harlow ripped them off. Patrick stated flatly that Harlow's claim of ignorance was demonstrably false. Harlow tried a different approach. He argued that military law did not apply to civilian facilities. Patrick was ready for this objection. He displayed the station's charter and operating agreements. He showed that Meridian Medical Station received 73% of its funding from Terran Defense Forces contracts. The facility was classified as a military support installation under Terran Administrative Code Section 12. Furthermore, any facility providing medical care to active-duty military personnel during wartime fell under joint jurisdiction. In cases involving military personnel, the military authority took precedence. Patrick continued his methodical demolition of Harlow's position. He explained that he had already filed formal charges with the Judge Advocate General's office. Within the hour, a military legal team would arrive to take Harlow into custody, pending court-martial. Harlow started to protest, but Patrick cut him off. Yes, civilians could be court-martialed under specific circumstances. Abuse of a military officer in a military support facility during wartime definitely qualified. The law was clear on this point. Harlow collapsed into his expensive chair. His arrogance melted away like ice under a blowtorch. He looked suddenly old and frightened. Patrick was not finished. He leaned forward and placed his hands on Harlow's desk. His face was close enough that Harlow could see the cold fury barely contained behind those steady eyes. Patrick told Harlow exactly what would happen next. First, immediate removal from his position. Second, court-martial on multiple charges, each carrying years in military prison. Third, review of his medical license and administrative credentials by both military and civilian boards, with likely permanent revocation. Fourth, his friends at the Colonial Medical Consortium would abandon him the moment they realized the legal liability he represented. Patrick straightened up, but continued speaking. He said he had reviewed the station's records for the past 3 years. He had found a disturbing pattern. Harlow had consistently prioritized profitable patients over critical cases. He had filed fraudulent insurance claims. He had created a toxic work environment that drove away talented staff. Patrick had already forwarded all the evidence to both military and civilian investigators. Harlow's career was finished and his freedom was in serious jeopardy. Harlow's voice shook when he asked if there was any way to avoid court-martial. Patrick considered this question for a long moment. He told Harlow there might be one option, but it would require complete cooperation and acceptance of consequences. If Harlow immediately resigned his position, surrendered his medical license voluntarily, provided full testimony about corruption at the facility, made a public apology to Katie and the staff, and agreed never to work in medical or administrative capacity again, then Patrick might recommend a plea agreement. This would avoid the most serious charges, but Harlow would still face legal consequences, including fines and restricted liberty. It was better than decades in military prison. Patrick made clear this was a one-time offer available for exactly 60 seconds. Harlow looked at the clock on his desk and then back at Patrick's implacable face. He realized he had no real choice. If he refused and went to court-martial, he would lose everything and spend the rest of his life in prison. At least this way he might salvage some small fragment of his future. Harlow's hands trembled as he reached for his computer terminal. He accessed the resignation documents that Commander Chen transmitted to his system. He applied his digital signature. Then he recorded a statement admitting his wrongdoing and apologizing to Katie. His voice broke several times during the recording, but he got through it. Finally, he signed agreements to cooperate with all investigations and to surrender his credentials. Patrick watched without expression as Harlow destroyed his own career, with a few keystrokes and voice recordings. When it was done, Patrick told Harlow he was confined to quarters until the legal team arrived. Patrick opened the office door and 2 Marines entered. They escorted Harlow out of his luxurious office for the last time. He walked past his expensive furniture and artwork with his head bowed in shame. Staff members in the corridor watched him go. Some felt satisfaction at seeing justice served. Others felt uncomfortable witnessing a man's complete downfall. But everyone agreed that Harlow had brought this upon himself. Patrick stood in the empty office for a moment looking around. Then he turned and walked out. Commander Chen fell into step beside him. She quietly asked if he wanted to inspect the station or meet with the acting administrator. Patrick shook his head. He had only one destination in mind. He made his way through the corridors toward the residential quarters. People watched him pass, but now the atmosphere had changed. The tension was gone, replaced by relief and quiet celebration. Staff members offered words of thanks. Marines saluted with visible pride. Patrick reached Katie's quarters and found the door unlocked. He entered and saw his wife sitting on her bunk. She was wearing the scarf over her head again. When she saw him, she stood up quickly. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then Katie's composure broke. Tears streamed down her face and her shoulders shook with sobs. Patrick crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. She buried her face against his chest and cried while he held her tightly. They stood like that for several minutes until Katie's tears subsided. Patrick gently removed the scarf from her head and ran his hand over her bare scalp. He told her she was beautiful. He said her courage in standing up to Harlow made him proud. He promised that no one would ever humiliate her like that again. Katie tried to apologize for pulling him away from his command, but Patrick stopped her. He cupped her face in his hands and looked into her eyes. He told her that she was his wife, his partner, and his priority. The war would wait. His mission right now was ensuring she got justice and knew she was valued. Later that evening, Harlow's recorded apology was broadcast throughout the station as part of the agreement he had signed. The video showed him sitting in his quarters looking haggard and defeated. All his arrogance was gone. He admitted that his treatment of Lieutenant Morrison was wrong, illegal, and reprehensible. He apologized directly to Katie, to the medical staff who witnessed the humiliation, and to all military personnel for disrespecting their service and sacrifice. He acknowledged abusing his authority and announced his immediate resignation. The broadcast lasted only 3 minutes, but those 3 minutes sealed his fate in the eyes of everyone who watched. Reactions to the apology were mixed across the station. Some people felt satisfaction seeing the cruel administrator brought low. Others felt uncomfortable watching a human being so thoroughly defeated. A few even felt some pity for Harlow despite what he had done, but everyone agreed that justice had been served. The medical staff gathered in small groups discussing what would happen next. There was hope that the new administration would be better, and that the station could return to its true purpose of healing people. Katie watched the broadcast with Patrick sitting beside her on the bunk. When it ended, she felt strangely empty inside. She had wanted justice and accountability. She had wanted Harlow to understand the wrong he had done. Now she had all that, but it did not bring the satisfaction she expected. Watching his complete destruction made her feel uncomfortable. Patrick seemed to understand what she was feeling without her saying anything. He told her that her reaction showed her good character. She was not vindictive or cruel. She had just wanted the abuse to stop and to be treated with dignity. Now she had both those things. The next morning brought unexpected developments. Patrick's legal team had spent the night going through Harlow's computer files and personal records. What they discovered was far more serious than simple abuse of power. Hidden in encrypted files on Harlow's personal server were communications with agents of the Dravix Collective. The alien enemy had been cultivating Harlow as an intelligence asset for over 2 years. They had paid him money and promised him a position in their territory after humanity's defeat. In exchange, Harlow had been feeding them medical intelligence. Commander Chen brought the discovery to Patrick while he was having breakfast with Katie in the station's officers' mess. She showed them the evidence on her tablet. Harlow had provided the Dravix with casualty reports showing how many soldiers were being wounded. He had given them details about new medical technologies being developed for military use. He had shared information about the locations and schedules of medical transport ships carrying wounded soldiers. Some of those ships had been attacked by Dravix forces. People had died because of information Harlow provided. The revelation shocked everyone. What had started as a workplace abuse case had uncovered a significant security breach. Katie felt sick realizing that the man she worked for had been betraying humanity all along. Patrick's expression grew grim as he reviewed the files. This was bigger than one corrupt administrator. This was treason during wartime. Commander Chen immediately sealed the station and initiated counterintelligence protocols. Nobody could leave and all communications were monitored. Military intelligence officers were already en route to conduct a comprehensive investigation. The investigation expanded over the following days. It revealed a network of Dravik's operations throughout human space. Harlow had not been working alone. There were other collaborators scattered across different facilities and organizations. Some were motivated by greed like Harlow. Others acted out of fear or misguided ideology. The intelligence breakthrough allowed Terran military intelligence to identify and neutralize 12 other operatives. The operation was codenamed Clean House, and it swept through corporate offices, colonial administrations, and civilian infrastructure. More importantly, the communications intercepts revealed valuable information about Dravik's military capabilities and strategic plans. Intelligence analysts discovered internal tensions within the Dravik's collective. Several member species were growing weary of the costly war with humanity. They questioned their leadership's aggressive expansion policies. This information was gold for Terran strategists planning future operations. Patrick realized that Katie's act of defiance in saving Corporal Bennett's life had inadvertently exposed a traitor. If Harlow had not reacted so viciously, if he had not drawn military attention, his espionage might have continued undetected for months or years. Katie struggled to process everything. She learned that her decision to save one Marine's life, the choice that led to her humiliation, had struck a major blow against the enemy. She had potentially saved thousands of human lives by exposing the spy network. Military officials told her she was a hero, but Katie did not feel heroic. She had just been doing her job, following her oath to provide care without prejudice. The fact that it led to something bigger was accidental. Word of Katie's role spread through military channels quickly. She became something of a legend among the troops. The nurse who stood up to corruption and uncovered a spy network. Fellow medical personnel on Meridian viewed her with newfound respect and admiration. When she returned to duty wearing her restored rank insignia, people stopped her in corridors to thank her. It made her uncomfortable because she did not see herself as special. She was just trying to be a good nurse. Corporal Jake Bennett requested permission to speak with Katie after he was fully recovered. They met in the station's observation lounge, a quiet area with large windows showing the stars. Bennett stood when Katie entered, and his eyes showed deep emotion. He thanked her again for saving his life. Then he thanked her for her courage in facing Harlow. He told her that every Marine on the station considered it an honor to serve alongside her. Other Marines who had been treated in her ward over the months joined them. They all expressed similar sentiments. Katie was moved by their words, but she insisted she was just doing what any good medical officer would do. Patrick spent 3 days on Meridian making sure everything was properly handled. He met with the acting station administrator, a competent physician named Dr. Laura Banks, who had been promoted to temporary chief executive officer. Banks was everything Harlow was not. She was compassionate, ethical, and focused on patient care rather than profits. She immediately began implementing changes to improve working conditions and restore the station's reputation. Patrick was satisfied that Katie would be working in a better environment going forward. Before leaving, Patrick attended a formal ceremony in the station's main assembly hall. Dr. Banks presented Katie with a commendation for exceptional service and dedication to duty. The assembled medical staff and Marines applauded. Patrick stood beside his wife, feeling proud. He delivered a brief speech thanking the medical staff for their service. He reminded everyone that the real heroes of any war were not just the soldiers who fought, but the healers who put them back together. He acknowledged that Katie had faced injustice and humiliation, but had responded with dignity and courage. These qualities represented the best of humanity. The ceremony ended, and Patrick prepared to return to his command. Katie walked with him to the docking bay where the Valkyrie's Fury waited. They held hands and talked quietly about when they might see each other again. Patrick promised to visit whenever possible. Katie insisted that he focus on his duty and not worry about her. She was recovered now and ready to move forward. They kissed goodbye, and Patrick boarded his ship. Katie watched from the observation deck as the corvette detached and flew away into the darkness. She touched her short hair and realized she no longer felt ashamed. What Harlow intended as humiliation had become a symbol of her strength. The intelligence gained from Harlow's files proved to be a strategic game-changer for the Terran Defense Forces. Military analysts spent weeks going through the communications and documents. They identified Dravik's military facilities, supply routes, and communication protocols. They learned about internal political divisions within the Dravik's collective. Some member species had never fully supported the war against humanity. These moderate factions were now openly questioning whether the conflict was worth the cost. The information revealed fractures that Terran strategists could exploit. Fleet Admiral Caroline West, the supreme commander of all Terran military forces, convened a special meeting of the High Command. Generals and admirals from across human space gathered to discuss strategy. Patrick attended via holographic link from his flagship. The admirals reviewed the intelligence windfall and debated how to use it. Some argued for a massive offensive to crush the Draviks while they were divided. Others suggested diplomatic overtures to the moderate factions. Admiral West listened to all arguments before making her decision. She authorized a two-pronged approach combining military pressure with diplomatic outreach. The Terran Diplomatic Corps began secret communications with moderate Draviks factions. They offered terms for a negotiated settlement that would end the war. Meanwhile, the military prepared for a major offensive, designed to demonstrate humanity's strength and resolve. Patrick's Third Fleet was chosen to lead the attack. His target was the Arcturus sector, where Dravik's forces had established a strong presence. The operation would use the intelligence from Harlow's files to strike with precision at key enemy installations. Patrick returned to his fleet and immediately began planning. He spent days with his staff officers reviewing maps and intelligence reports. They identified Dravik supply depots, communication relays, and forward operating bases. They planned attack vectors and contingencies. The operation was codenamed Iron Hammer, and it would involve coordinating dozens of warships across multiple systems. Success would require perfect timing and flawless execution. Failure would cost lives and potentially strengthen Dravik's resolve. 6 weeks after the incident on Meridian Station, Patrick gave the order to launch Iron Hammer. His fleet jumped into the Arcturus sector and hit the Dravik's positions like a thunderbolt. Human warships struck at supply depots, destroying stockpiles of weapons and fuel. Strike fighters disabled communication relays, cutting off Dravik's commanders from their forces. Marines boarded and captured forward bases, taking prisoners and seizing documents. The operation unfolded with devastating precision over 72 hours. The Dravik's forces were caught completely off guard. They had not expected such a coordinated and precise attack. Their commanders issued contradictory orders because their communications were disrupted. Their supply lines collapsed, leaving frontline units without ammunition or food. Human casualties were minimal due to superior intelligence and tactical planning. Dravik's losses were catastrophic. Thousands of their soldiers were killed or captured. Dozens of installations were destroyed or seized. The psychological impact was even greater than the physical damage. After 72 hours, Patrick ordered a tactical withdrawal. His fleet pulled back to defensive positions, leaving the Draviks reeling. The operation had achieved all its objectives. More importantly, it had sent a clear message. Humanity could strike anywhere at any time with overwhelming force. The Draviks Collective's leadership was forced to reconsider their entire strategy. Intelligence reports showed that moderate factions were gaining political strength, while the aggressive factions that had started the war found themselves isolated and discredited. Within a week of Iron Hammer's conclusion, moderate Draviks factions formally proposed a ceasefire and negotiations. The Terran High Command reviewed the proposal carefully. Admiral West consulted with political leaders and military commanders, including Patrick. The consensus was that this represented a genuine opportunity to end the war on favorable terms. The Terran government agreed to preliminary talks. Both sides established a neutral meeting location at Gateway Station, a diplomatic facility orbiting the border between human and Dravik space. Back on Meridian Station, Katie followed the news like everyone else. She felt a strange connection to these events, knowing that her ordeal had inadvertently contributed to the intelligence breakthrough. When she heard about Iron Hammer's success and Patrick's role in leading it, she felt both pride and worry. She knew he was in danger every day, but she also understood that his duty was important. She sent him messages of support and love whenever communications allowed. Life on the station had improved dramatically under Dr. Banks's leadership. The new administrator prioritized patient care and staff welfare over political considerations and profit margins. She implemented changes that made work more efficient and less stressful. The toxic atmosphere that Harlow had created was replaced with collaboration and mutual support. Medical staff who had been considering transfers decided to stay. The station's reputation began to recover. Katie returned to full duty and threw herself into her work. She continued saving lives and treating wounded soldiers with the same dedication that had always defined her. Her hair was growing back slowly, but she kept it short, finding the practical style better suited to her job. Other nurses on the station had adopted similar hairstyles in solidarity. What was meant to shame one woman had become a symbol of collective resilience. When new patients arrived, some recognized Katie from stories circulating through military channels. They told her it was an honor to be treated by her. Katie always responded the same way. She was just a nurse doing her job. The peace negotiations began 3 months after Patrick's offensive. The talks were complex and difficult. Both sides had suffered losses and harbored resentments. But both sides were also genuinely motivated to end the conflict. The Terran delegation presented humanity's terms: complete withdrawal of Dravik's forces from disputed territories, formal recognition of human sovereignty over colonized systems, establishment of a demilitarized zone, and reparations for damages. The Draviks, weakened by military defeats and internal political turmoil, had little choice but to accept most terms. The moderate factions within the Draviks collective used the peace process to consolidate their power. They purged the aggressive leadership that had initiated the war. A new government emerged, one that was more pragmatic and less expansionist. The peace accords were signed in a historic ceremony broadcast across both human and Dravik space. Many on both sides harbored lingering resentments, but there was collective relief that 3 years of war had finally ended. Katie watched the signing ceremony, on a screen in the station's break room along with other medical staff. When the human and Dravik's representatives signed the documents and shook hands, the room erupted in cheers. People hugged each other and some cried with relief. Katie felt tears running down her own cheeks. She thought about all the wounded soldiers she had treated and those who had died despite her best efforts. The war was over. No more young people would come through her ward bleeding and broken. That alone made everything worthwhile. Patrick returned to Meridian 2 weeks after the peace accords were signed. He had been granted leave to visit his wife. They spent a week together walking through the station, eating meals in the mess hall and simply enjoying each other's company. They talked about the future and what peace would mean. Patrick told Katie he was proud of her for how she had handled everything. Katie told him she was proud of him for his service to humanity. They both acknowledged that their life together would always be complicated by duty and distance, but their commitment remained unshakable. On their last evening together before Patrick had to return to his fleet, they stood in the observation lounge watching the stars. Katie leaned against her husband's shoulder feeling content. She had been through humiliation and pain, but she had survived and grown stronger. The war was over and humanity had prevailed. Her small act of defiance in saving one Marine's life had contributed to something much larger. She did not feel like a hero, but she felt satisfied knowing she had done the right thing even when it cost her dearly. 6 months after the peace accords were signed, Katie received notification that she would be awarded the Terran Defense Forces Intelligence Medal. The award recognized her role in exposing the spy network, even though her contribution had been unintentional. The official citation stated that her courage in the face of abuse and her commitment to duty had led directly to the discovery of enemy espionage activities that threatened human security. The medal ceremony would be held on Meridian Station with senior military officials in attendance. Katie felt conflicted about receiving the award. She had not set out to uncover spies or strike a blow against the enemy. She had simply been trying to do her job as a nurse. The fact that it led to something bigger was accidental, but Patrick encouraged her to accept the honor gracefully. He told her that intent mattered less than results. Her actions had saved lives and helped end the war. That deserved recognition regardless of whether she had planned it that way. The ceremony was held in the station's main assembly hall. Medical staff, Marines, and civilian workers filled the seats. Senior officers from the Terran Defense Forces attended, including Admiral West herself. Katie stood at attention on the stage wearing her dress uniform. Her short hair was neatly styled and her lieutenant's bars gleamed on her collar. Corporal Bennett, now promoted to sergeant, was chosen to present the medal. He walked onto the stage carrying a case containing the decoration. He opened it and removed the medal with its distinctive blue ribbon. Patrick stood beside Katie as Bennett pinned the medal to her uniform. The assembled crowd applauded. Admiral West gave a short speech praising Katie's dedication and courage. She spoke about how ordinary people doing their jobs with integrity could have extraordinary impacts. Katie listened, feeling embarrassed by the attention, but also grateful for the support. When it was over, she shook hands with the officers and thanked everyone for coming. The reception afterward was pleasant, with people congratulating her and sharing stories. More meaningful to Katie than the medal was seeing how Meridian Station had transformed. Under Dr. Banks's leadership, the facility had become a model for military medical care. The toxic culture that Harlow created was completely gone. Staff members worked together with mutual respect and professionalism. Patient care was the top priority. Morale was high and people actually enjoyed coming to work. Several medical professionals who had left during Harlow's tenure requested transfers back to the station. The changes were so successful that other facilities began adopting similar practices. Dr. Vincent Harlow faced justice for his crimes. Despite his cooperation with investigators, the evidence of espionage was too damning. He was tried by military tribunal on charges of treason, espionage, and assault on a commissioned officer. The trial lasted 3 weeks and was covered extensively by news networks throughout human space. Witnesses testified about his abuse of authority and his collaboration with the enemy. The communications with Dravik's agents were entered as evidence. Harlow's defense attorneys tried to argue that he had been coerced, but the prosecution demolished that claim with financial records showing the payments he received. The verdict was guilty on all counts. The treason charges carried a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment. Harlow was sentenced to serve his time in a maximum security military prison on a remote mining colony. His medical license was permanently revoked. His assets were seized to pay restitution to victims. His name became synonymous with betrayal and cowardice. Katie attended his sentencing not out of vindictiveness but to see justice completed. When the sentence was pronounced, she felt no satisfaction or triumph. She simply felt that a dangerous man had been removed from a position where he could harm others. The incident on Meridian and its aftermath had far-reaching consequences for human society. The exposure of civilian collaborators led to comprehensive reviews of security protocols at all facilities that interacted with military personnel. New regulations were implemented to ensure better oversight and accountability. Background checks became more thorough. Communication monitoring increased. Some civil liberties advocates objected to the expanded security measures, but most people accepted them as necessary during wartime, even after peace was achieved. More importantly, the story became a powerful narrative about human values and resilience. Katie Morrison's name was known throughout human space. She became a symbol of ordinary people doing extraordinary things by adhering to principles and standing up for what was right. Her story was taught in military academies, medical schools, and leadership courses. Students analyzed what she did and why it mattered. The key lesson was that doing the right thing, even when it cost personally, could have impacts far beyond what anyone expected. Alien species in the galaxy took notice of humanity's response to the Dravik's threat. The combination of military capability and the narrative about Katie's courage reinforced humanity's reputation. Other civilizations recognized that humans were not to be underestimated. Diplomatic relations improved as species that had been neutral during the war now sought closer ties with humanity. Trade agreements were signed. Cultural exchanges began. Humanity's position in the galactic community strengthened significantly. 2 years after the incident, Katie and Patrick celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary aboard Meridian Station. Patrick had taken leave from his command to spend time with his wife. They had dinner in the station's best restaurant, then went to the observation lounge. They stood together at the viewport, watching the stars beyond the glass. They reflected on everything that had happened since that terrible day when Harlow humiliated Katie. So much had changed. The war was over. Harlow was in prison. Katie was decorated and respected. Their relationship had survived the strain of separation and crisis. Patrick told Katie he was proud of how she handled everything from the initial abuse to the aftermath and recognition. Katie smiled and said she was proud of him too for standing up for her and serving humanity with honor. They both acknowledged that their life together would always be complicated by military service and duty. But their commitment to each other remained unshakable. They had proven they could weather any storm as long as they stood together. With peace established, humanity entered a new era. The conflict with the Draviks had been costly, but it demonstrated humanity's capability to defend itself and its values. New diplomatic relationships formed with species throughout the galaxy. Human colonies expanded into new territories. Science and technology advanced rapidly now that resources were not consumed by war. The future looked bright and full of possibilities. Katie continued her work on Meridian, treating patients from multiple species as the station expanded its mission. She became an advocate for universal healthcare standards and ethical medical practice across species boundaries. She gave lectures and wrote papers about her experiences. Young medical students sought her advice and mentorship. She influenced a new generation of healthcare providers who took seriously their obligations to serve all people regardless of politics or profit. Patrick eventually accepted a promotion to Supreme, commander of the Terran Marine Expeditionary Forces, overseeing all military operations in the Outer Rim territories. Despite increased responsibilities, he made sure to visit Katie as often as possible. They maintained their relationship through regular communication and scheduled reunions. After several years of continued service, they both decided it was time to start a family. Katie reduced her hours, and Patrick delegated more authority to subordinates. They welcomed a daughter whom they named Hope as a symbol of humanity's future. Years later, when asked about the incident during an interview, Katie gave a simple statement that captured the heart of the story. She was not a hero for standing up to Harlow or for exposing the spy network. She was simply a nurse doing her job, caring for those who needed help, regardless of personal cost. The real heroes were the people who supported each other, who refused to accept abuse and injustice, and who built systems protecting the vulnerable. Patrick, when asked the same question, provided his own perspective. He did not storm Meridian as some vengeful crusader. He came because his wife, a good person dedicated to helping others, was wronged. He came because it was the right thing to do. That was what humanity was about, standing up for what was right and protecting those who could not protect themselves.